Good morning. It's Wednesday, July 2nd, 2014. This is Tech Talk Today, episode 19. My name is Chris, and my friends, there are now officially 182 days remaining until the end of the year. I don't know why I bring that up. I just felt like, wow, we're on the other side of this thing for sure now. So I got a little secret. I'm not in town. I mean, I'm here, but my friends, the Mumble Room, and myself are using our time machine to record an episode of Tech Talk Today for you while I am out in a cabin with my son. And I was actually planning to broadcast live from there, but if you saw the Patreon video, Dylan didn't agree that Dad should do a live broadcast from our cabin in the woods. And Dylan was primarily concerned about the internet connection. He thinks it might be satellite, and he knows that the upload delay there could be problematic for live streaming. I said, Dylan, my 5-year-old son, you are correct. So we're going to pre-record one today, but I want to do something fun. I want to talk about two operating systems that almost dominated the industry. In fact, a lot of analysts, a lot of tech analysts thought it would. Both of them. And one you've heard of before. Popey actually called it on the live show, on the pre-show. OS2. So since you've heard of OS2, you're actually going to get to see OS2 this week. So if you're watching the video version, this will be a fun one to watch because I've got an old clip where they give us a demo of OS2 when it was a brand new product. And you'll actually see like the presenters in shock and awe for a few moments. Like they just stop and they're awed by it. But the first operating system I want to talk about is one that I'm willing to bet you've never heard of. It's called AUX. It's Apple's version of Unix before there was ever a thing called OS X. It ran on the Motorola 68K-based Macintoshes, and you might not if you know it existed, you might not know any more than that, though. I really didn't. It seems to have been something that was really big for a little while. It was based on AT&T's Unix system version 2.2, with lots of extensions from like BSD4 and things like that. And it's supported on a Macintosh like NFS and Yellow Pages and SendMail and full POSIX compliance on an old 68K-based Mac. Not everything about AUX was really all that Apple polished, though. As an example, the TCP/IP protocol panel in AUX was read-only. If you wanted to actually make changes to like your network settings, you had to do it the old Unix way on the command line on a Macintosh, which had a bunch of Mac users freaking out. It's pretty funny to read back some of the reactions, some of the early reviews. This is the future of the Macintosh, and Apple was really struggling back then. In fact, even in this time, Microsoft was also experimenting with a Unix-based operating system. But it almost was. AUX, before they merged back with NeXT, before they created OS X, we almost had an entirely different operating system, and you have to wonder how successful it would have been, because I'm about to show you the clip of this, and you can see how rooted it was in an old era of computing.
As we mentioned earlier, Unix has been one operating system that users have turned to if they were interested in multi-user, multitasking capability. It's never been known for its user-friendliness, though. Apple is trying to solve that problem with its new AUX for the Mac 2. Wendy Woods has a report.
This is a Unix operating system which for the first time combines the multitasking of Unix with the friendly interface of the Macintosh. It's Apple's version of Unix called AUX. Berkeley, California's Abacus Concepts is one of the first software developers to write for this new hybrid operating system. Abacus has adapted its StatView 2 statistical analysis package, designed for the Mac, to run as a Unix program. People here say AUX is exciting because it gives them tools they've never had before.
It's not visual yet, but true multitasking is there, true inter-process communication, and also virtual memory, which is important for us also. The idea of being able to access more memory than physically resides in the machine is very important for very large applications.
The multitasking capabilities should be much more evident in the next version of StatView 2.
Well, we envision that typically people are going to be using StatView on AUX systems when they have large analyses to perform. And we are going to break StatView up in such a way that they can initiate those analyses and have them run in the background, while they can go off and access their data, play with things, or do other smaller calculations all in the foreground. That's just the smartest way for us to do it.
Abacus and other developers are banking on the belief that AUX will expand the Unix market to people of all walks of life who want the power of Unix and the ease of use of a Mac. In Berkeley, California, for the Computer Chronicles, I'm Wendy Woods.
it's interesting to see how these companies, they recognize that utilizing something based on Unix, and again, Microsoft was also trying this at the same time they were doing other things. They realized there was this need, but they just couldn't figure out the execution. I don't know if anybody in the Mumble Room got to see that UI, but you could see how it was so rooted in a previous generation of computing. Anybody in the room?
It looked like Gem, the desktop that came on the Atari ST. Very much like Gem. But, I mean, I'd never heard of AUX before. I mean, I've used a bunch of Unixes in professional environments like, HPUX and SCO and the IBM one, AIX, but I'd never even heard of AUX.
Yeah, I've even worked on a System 390 mainframe for a little bit, and I'd never heard of it until I started doing some digging for this episode. And of course, what ended up happening is sort of self-evident now. Apple didn't go that direction. The backlash was too strong. And they ended up later sort of going through almost a decade of promising a next-generation operating system, continually failing to deliver and just sort of iterating on the old Mac OS code base until they merged with Next. They brought in guys like Steve Forstall or Scott Forstall, sorry, and they came in there and built Next up and built up OS 10 and went that route, which has worked well for them now. They're 11 years in. But I think if they would have gone with AUX, maybe it would have worked for business. I mean, that was obviously such a business operating system. Another business operating system, this is the one Popey called OS2, was really set to dominate the desktop computing space. And it had a lot of competitive advantages over other operating systems at the time. And I think this is the one that we've all heard the most about, OS2. So I thought for this segment, what we do instead of talk about it is I wanted to show you some of the interface, because I don't know how many of you have actually ever run it. OS2 was really built at the time for IBM. I mean, they really wanted to run it on their PS2 hardware. They had a whole line of personal computers. My school had them. They were the PS2, 386 and 486 lines. Now, of course, these also ran other operating systems, but the first version of OS2 was released in December of 1987, and they actually kept updating it until December of 2001. So let's watch this clip. You can see a good demonstration of OS2, and note how the presenters are sometimes almost awestruck by some of what they see.
With us in the studio now is Lee Reiswig, director of the Austin Lab at IBM. Gary?
Look at this whole setup here, Lee, and it looks like a computer room rather than a personal computer. What do you have here, anyway?
We brought, Gary, part of the Austin Lab here to the show tonight, so we can show you all the things that OS2 does. And we've got two Model 60s, both running OS2, and a monitor on one and monitor on the other. And then we've got some communications control units back to Austin that allow us to be live connected with communications from these systems. And I'll show you how some of the communications works in OS2.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get ready.
Okay, this is the main menu that you see when you bring up OS2. It's like the DOS old C prompt, but this is now how it comes up. On the left-hand side, you see the programs that you can run, and on the right-hand side, it shows the programs that are actually running. We started a bunch already. The first one there is the DOS command prompt, and we can go ahead and run that, and that's actually the DOS compatibility window in OS2 that runs PC-DOS programs without modification. I'm here running a F-16 flight simulator, for example. And there's the main screen of the flight simulator. We can go back to that main menu now and look through the other things that we've got here. We have the Communication Manager running. We have some advanced program-to-program communication programs running, 3270 terminal emulation back to a 370 system in Austin, an asynchronous terminal session like to Dow Jones. We're using a system in Austin again. The new Relational Database Manager for OS2 and DisplayWrite written for OS2 to run in the new large row memory. So let's cycle through a few of those and look at them. Okay. First thing we do is pick the one we want, and let's go to the Communication Manager menu. And we can start and stop communications, and the Communication Manager of OS2, the unique things about it are that it can do so many different kinds of communications, number one, and it can do them concurrently. And right now, we're running multiple communication sessions between these two Model 60s. We're transferring files from one Model 60 to the other, and we're doing it with two separate file transfers going on in parallel, as well as being connected back to the Austin host systems. This is one of the 6.2 sessions. You can see the data cycling through the windows here. It's coming from this system. Let's go ahead and take a look at that same session running on this system. Sorry. And you can see that both systems are cycling and transferring data. We're actually doing multiple sessions simultaneously here between the systems. I'll switch to the second. This is the second session. It's also running on this one. And they're running simultaneously across an SDLC line between these two systems. We'll go to the next one. This is the prof's system in Austin where we used it to get our mail and exchange notes across the IBM Corporation. We're not just running one session here, though, with the 370 in Austin. This is the PROS session. Here's an asynchronous PROS sessions. If I was dialed in from home and I wanted to be able to get my mail, I could use an inexpensive modem on OS2 and talk to my host system. This is the database manager for OS2. It's a new relational database manager that provides easy access to data. Let's create a query here, for example. This is the main menu. It says, do you want to create a new query or use one that you've previously created? I'm going to go ahead and do a new one. And I want to open the query. And it says, what tables would you like to use for your query? And I'll ask it to give me a list, and it says you have 3 inventory organ staff. I'm going to pick the staff table.
And keep in mind, this is something that wasn't available to just your average desktop computer, right? And there's multiple programs running at the same time right now. That was revolutionary.
I don't have to know SQL. And so
we hear that SQL is a part of the extended version now. Is that,
right.
Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so what we're reviewing here is the extended.
We're looking at the extended edition.
Okay.
It contains an IBM Communication Manager that I showed you some of, and then it also contains this relational database manager integral to the operating system. Now it's asking me for what columns of data do I want, and I'm going to pick all of them. And so it lists all the columns on the left-hand side, and now it asks me for what row conditions.
You note the transitionary state of the UI. It still looks like a text-driven UI, except for the mouse works. It's almost like a hybrid between the DOS era and the introduction of the mouse when you didn't quite know what you were going to get.
It's a little simpler and a little faster for us. So I go up here to Actions, and the first action is Run. And I select Run, and it goes against that table in the database and puts out the report in a default format, which I can then customize. Now, all of that was going on while these communication sessions, this is the 6.2 session, 3270 sessions are connected into Austin. The modems are running with the file transfers between the 2 systems. And that gives you a feel for the power of OS2 and the kinds of things it can do.
Do you see that the SQL interface then as being something that carries on up to your mainframe?
All of the extended edition user interface as well as the programming interfaces are what IBM refers to as SAA compliant. OS2 is the systems application architecture implementation for IBM and be consistent on our 370 systems, on our mid-range systems, and on the PS2s.
Okay, can you show us Presentation Manager, Lee?
Okay, Stuart, this is a
this is the hot stuff right here.
Presentation Manager. It ships in October on the standard edition.
This wasn't released at the time of this demonstration.
And it brings IBM System Application Architecture Common User Access Standard to OS2 and PS2s. It is a joint development between us and Microsoft, and as you can see...
I want to stop right here. So what he just said is something that was a massive initiative back in the day. The Common User Interface Standard that was a joint initiative between multiple titans of the industry to say that all desktop PC applications should look like this. And isn't that funny now? Kind of looking at where we're at right now with mobile and Android. Google just announced Android Material, saying that all apps should sort of look like this. iOS 7 is very design heavy. Metro is extremely design heavy. All of the new platforms, all of the new touch platforms are really talking about, a common look across the apps. And here, even back in the day when they were transitioning from DOS applications to GUI applications, again, that question came up. And it was something that it was a battle that fought back and forth for years. And there was even some backstabbing because they all signed up for this common GUI alliance, and then they started immediately differentiating each other's apps to make them stand out and violated essentially what they'd all agree on. So that's interesting to watch this part now of the video where they're demonstrating what the future of GUI applications will finally look like because we've all agreed.
The windows are very analogous, and the presentation is very analogous to what's in the Windows 386 and Windows 2 product. I'm going to give you a couple examples of the kinds of things that applications can do. I'm going to move through a list of files here and execute one that creates some graphs for us, and you can see some of the graphing capabilities that we'll begin to see. I'll broaden the window here, and it has the same kind of pull-down menus that we're accustomed to. Let's pick some, say, a bar graph here, for example. Here's a bar graph. We can look at line graphs, and we can look at Gantt charts even. Okay. So it gives us the ability.
So this is one of the first time TV audiences in the late 80s saw what this would look like.
Users to deal with graphical information on the screen as well. Now let's go back and look at, because we're on multitasking operating system running multiple applications. The advantage of a windowed system is that we can actually see things going on simultaneously in these windows. And let's pick an example of an application we have here that gives us some movement on the screen in the application. And we can start a couple of these up, and you actually see the applications running simultaneously. So here's just just scrolls the characters. Now these applications can be scrolled and windowed just like any other application. And in fact, we can start up more than one. And I'll start another one here. And you can actually watch what's going on in both windows simultaneously, which is nice if you're looking for, say, a message or a particular, oops, got the wrong. You can actually.
So this could be a background communication program, for example.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I think it's interesting they're struggling to think of examples of why you might want to have multiple windows and multiple processes.
Presentation Manager. Right.
Lee, now, with the move from the standard version of OS2 to looks like a proprietary version, is that what IBM is doing now, is moving toward proprietary, their own software?
No, you know, it's very important, as we thought, to have the OS2 capabilities across all the systems in the industry, and that's why we worked with Microsoft to provide the standard edition of OS2. But we also wanted to provide IBM enhancements to it to make it communicate better with our own systems and to put a systems application architecture standard across our hardware and make that work better than any in the industry. And that's why we did Extended Edition. Extended Edition does not preclude anyone from running their own communications or database management system on the Extended Edition or on the Standard Edition.
Lee, thanks very much for being here.
Okay,
we're out of time. That's our look at multitasking, OS2, and the Presentation Manager. Hope we'll see you here next week on Computer Chronicles.
Now, I know that was a little long, but I just think that is a little bit of technology archaeology that is just fascinating to go down and see how they did that, and you know, what they thought of it back then, and what they thought was a good idea, and how they pictured the future. It's all, to me, it gives perspective on the things that we talk about today. I worked with OS2 in a very professional capacity. To me, OS2 was the operating system that ran on the 486 that controlled the mainframe at the bank that I worked at. And it was a very arduous process for me to be able to use the OS2 computer, and when I used it, I had to be very careful, and I was primarily inside this IBM proprietary application that managed the functions of the mainframe. And so for me, OS2 was very businesslike. But Popey, I know you played with OS2 maybe more in a casual capacity, or what?
No, actually, well, both. I mean, I worked in a bank where we used it on front-end desktop PCs.
Yeah, it was big in banks.
Yeah, it was way more reliable than Windows, and also supported hardware that Windows didn't. So, like, a customer would phone in and have a query about their account, and the person on the end of the phone actually had gigantic, for the time, screens, like, you know, 21-inch screens, dual monitors. That Windows didn't do very well at all back in like 3.1 or 3.11 days, and OS2 did them perfectly, and they could get up the customers' scans of all the customers' documents that they've ever sent to the customer on these high-resolution displays. So if the customer had a query about stuff, and it worked brilliantly. It was so reliable, worked so well. And the hardware support was pretty decent as well.
Especially if you went IBM. I mean, that was really the magic sauce, is because IBM even back then had just a tremendous business focus and support. And so if you were in a bank, you essentially would have IBM provide your mainframe, and you could have IBM provide your front-end equipment, and then wrap a support contract around the whole thing and call it good for a lot of shops.
You could also hack together stuff that just felt undoable on Windows. I remember setting up a dial-in remote access server, and I had a I think eight serial port card in a compact desktop running OS2, and I had 8 command prompt windows, like a 8 terminals running that would listen for my users dialing in, so they could dial into the network. And Windows just couldn't do that. You couldn't have 8 terminals running at the same time with 8 modems going. And I fondly remember standing in the data center watching this compact desktop as all of the executives were dialing in, getting their email and stuff, and watching these modems blinking away. And it was so rock solid, so reliable, just running on commodity hardware.
And that was what was interesting is I think when we think about the whole Windows stability and we take a poke at it now, we're talking about it and we compare it in the context of Linux, but it actually back in the day had a horrible reputation, and OS/2 was the gold standard, and that's why that 486 ran OS/2 that controlled the mainframe, because it was absolutely rock solid. And there's still systems out there to this day where they are still running OS/2, and there's a company out there that provides support for these machines and goes out there and services them and manages the operating system. It's amazing.
Yeah, and long after I stopped using and working on OS/2, you know, I'd check in at Manchester Airport in the UK and see one of the ticket machines was being rebooted and it was running OS/2. All the British Airways ticket machines ran OS/2. It was lovely to see.
I got a little bit of feedback I want to cover before we get out of here today. This one came in. Let's see, who was it from? Sent in from Carl on the topic of T-Mobile, and he says, "Hey TTT crew, just a few thoughts about T-Mobile's new music freedom thing. First of all, T-Mobile's plans, you don't have a data cap, it's limited LTE. After your data allotment, you bump down to 2G speeds. Second, I think that they're routing the traffic differently. The description of the service is without using your 4G LTE data. This sounds like they're routing this music freedom traffic where like streaming Pandora doesn't count against your data cap. He says that he thinks they're routing this music freedom traffic over the 3G or 2G networks of T-Mobile in an attempt to reduce wireless network congestion by shunting that traffic over to other frequencies. He says, you know, wireless networking capacity is a hard engineering problem to solve, and it's getting harder with more and more devices added to the networks. Crowding the existing wireless spectrum, there is a solution, though, build more cell towers, but it's quite expensive. He says it's simple that not getting around the fact that wireless network bandwidth is orders of magnitudes more expensive than home wired connections. So most consumers don't quite take this into consideration and therefore don't want to pay orders of magnitude more for a megabyte download. He goes on to say that he has some experience in the wireless industry, and he says, like, the viable solution I see is MVNOs like Ting, where users are exposed to the actual cost of using the network, so they have an incentive to constrain their usage. I hope providers like Ting become more popular, but I'm skeptical. He says, thanks for reading my long-winded response, and thanks for all the great shows. Keep up the awesome work. And he cites a few links where he suggests perhaps that T-Mobile is streaming over the music stuff over different frequencies. That would be actually, I would go from being angry about that to an actually kind of innovative solution. Why not utilize the less used frequencies to save your customers bandwidth? That actually, if that's how T-Mobile's doing it, that's technically impressive. And I go from being annoyed to, maybe more people should do this, and maybe there are more unique approaches to bandwidth restrictions and things like that in the wireless spectrum than there are with wired. Because with wired, it's it's fixed, right? But on wireless, you can add more capacity. You can shift things over to other spectrums. You can dynamically lease towers as you need them. There's a lot of things providers could do. I don't know. If anybody has any thoughts reflecting on the whole T-Mobile thing, I know I came down pretty hard on T-Mobile, but I like this insight here from Carl on maybe you're using different channels. What do you guys think of that? Nobody has any thoughts. All right. Well, I thought I would offer. Okay, well, that's going to wrap us up for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed the retro look back at some of the operating system stuff. I know I sure did. It's fun to reminisce and think about some of the challenges. Like when that guy was in there talking about, the different modems they had connected, I'm thinking, oh, man. I remember having to set up modems back in the day and what a pain in the butt that was. So in some ways, I'm almost glad we're arguing about mobile interfaces and wireless spectrum and not so much about the things we used to have to deal with, because I'm glad we fought those battles. I'm ready to move on. I thought to wrap up today's episode, we've played this one once before, but it just fits so perfectly with the theme of today's episode. I want to see if maybe I could sell you a Commodore 64 commercial. See you next week, everybody, or tomorrow. We'll have a pre-recorded episode for you. Thanks for joining us.
For under $600. So to stay even with Commodore in memory and price, IBM will have to slash its price, quadruple its memory. Apple will also be faced with a sizable chore, and so will Atari. As Shearson American Express put it, the Commodore 64 could be the microcomputer industry's outstanding new product introduction since the birth of the industry.